Yes, and you started to be a tree, but now you're back in human form, just for an instant. All right. So we had yesterday, or the last time we had talked, we had didn't record it, but we had gotten started on this issue or the topic about what is the self, because a lot of people have a lot of confusion about it, without understanding that, wait a minute, the problem of confusion may in fact be in our terminology, not in the concept or the experience of what is self and not self, which is really what we're trying to do with it. But we get lost in the language. But selfishness and not selfishness is actually an easier way to understand it. And we have other words like altruism, or greed. That generally greed is something that is seen as a selfish act, which means it's got a self at the bottom of it. I want, and so in fact, the greed and the feelings of greed is what creates the sense of the I that becomes so predominant and can be seen by almost any observer other than the guy who's being selfish. We think of ourselves as a self, and we have all kinds of expression of that in language. For instance, I'm angry, I'm hurt, or on the other side of the stick, the mobster with his gun out saying, "Don't take this personally." In other words, Billy, I love you, you're okay, but the boss told me to whack you, so out you go. Don't take it personally, all right? But Billy is not going to be able to take it not personally. He's going to take it personally.
Unless Billy happens to be an especially advanced practitioner of the Dharma.
Yeah, but he's not going to be confronted. His wisdom is high enough so that he's going to be successfully able to avoid such situation.
Yeah.
He's going to be best friends with that mobster and his boss. So yes, this is what we're getting at is that the evidence of self and selfishness is clear and evident. And it's also clear and evident in the sense that it is dangerous. And so one of the points that we had been talking about is this issue of the coronavirus 19, that people who are wise and think things through, they recognize that as part of the human race, they recognize the danger to the human race, to where the ones that are wanting to get out of the house, they're antsy, they're not able to deal with their feelings, and so they want to return their life, is from a selfish perspective. But the other way of looking at it is that they do not see their own personal danger. Instead of seeing it as a society's danger or a more compassionate view, they don't have any compassion in there. It's always looking at it from, I'm okay, I'm safe, and the hell with you. Now, in regard to I'm okay, you're okay, or Eric Burns' work on that topic, I'm okay and you're not okay is the position of the villain or the one-upper who is going to take advantage of the one who is in a one-down position, the one who is not okay, especially in their own mind. So you'll have hypochondriacs on, I'm not okay, you're okay, doctor, and the doctors who will go, I'm okay and you're not okay, patient, where's your dollar? And so that whole situation is set up like that. But in this regard, that selfish kind of I'm okay is not the same as the non-selfish I'm okay and you're okay too. Let's be partners. Let's be friends. We're in this together. Or in a larger sense of humanity, the compassion is that coronavirus is dangerous, killing a lot of old ladies. A lot of young men have mothers that they want to see survive this. That the fewer people that die, the less misery and suffering there's going to be in general. Never mind that there's some a golden or a silver thread on this cloud. This is a really dark cloud on humanity right now. And that group of people, about half the country in the United States, are seeing it strictly from a selfish perspective because they got the attitude that, well, coronavirus is not here and is not ours for this following group of reasons. And one of the reasons on there, oh, it's in New York, it's not in Iowa. And so after they get that ingrained into their mentality, then they think that, oh, we're safe, even though now new evidence is coming that Iowa is in fact in danger. Because they still see then on another item of the list, oh, Jesus is going to protect me because I'm a Christian, is another favorite one, and it's said in many different ways. But somehow they think that they're immune. Going back to wrong view with the quote, I can get away with it. This is a very selfish thing. Even though they're Christians, they're not practicing Christianity at all. They're practicing a very selfish form of Christianity, which is basically what Christianity has evolved into. It's a selfish protectionism. We're good Christians, and LGBTQ people are bad, and blacks are bad, and we're, and so it's a very tribal kind of selfishness.
Which is very, very far from the kind of radical message of universal love that Jesus taught, which actually is a complete
non-selfish,
in line with the teaching on non-self, because one of the things we spoke about a bit yesterday is love as a vehicle for letting go of the self and tapping into something much more universal, and within that universal feeling that sort of love can induce, that the sense of self is dialed right down, and
you're absolutely right. So let's explore that in the sense that now that we've talked about love and its issues, and we're already talking about the concept of selfishness or self-preservation, wanting to open back up, let's get things going kind of mentality that they have in America. Never mind who gets hurt. It won't be me or mine. That a wrong attitude that I can get away with it. Where in fact the right attitude is, let me stay out of its way. Don't point that rifle of coronavirus in this direction and expect me to sit still with it. I'm going to move out of its direction. I'm going to get out of harm's way, even if that means sitting at home for a few extra weeks. And in fact, this whole thing about love then can be put into that same context of selfishness or non-selfishness. And the one that you're talking about is the non-selfish, agape, open-hearted, friendly, compassion, right noble view, overall everybody's in the tent mentality. And then there's the kind of love that is the most common. And let me give you a few humorous points. Don't you just love that dress that she's in? As those two women are pointing across the floor over there. Okay. That's one kind of use. The other one is guy on his knees with maybe a flower and maybe a ring, saying things like, I love you, will you marry me? That's another kind of selfish love. He wants her, and he's trying to woo her by giving her things he thinks she wants. Fidelity with the rose and longevity with the diamond. And these are representations, but you can see it also in the sense of puppy love, or in the high schoolers with being lovesick, or can't get his mind off the girl. He wants to take her out, but he won't go quite. So he's in some sort of panic, hell, fearful state, afraid of being rejected. And so he won't go take the opportunity, but it's all based in selfishness, and he's trying to protect himself. And that's why he won't ask her, But if he did ask her, it would still be for selfish reasons. So
Yeah,
he's in a kind of
he's either
double
trying
nine.
to prop up his concept of self. I am the type of person who that type of person would be attracted to, or he's trying to save that self from a sense of obliteration. Oh no, maybe I'm not the type of person that that person would be attracted to.
Well, now that we understand both of those are based in selfishness, which is based in feelings, and in this regard, these are feelings of fear. So anything that's motivated out of fear generally has selfishness built into it. That in fact, the self-preservation instinct isn't that exactly. That just nailed it. Self-preservation instinct. What is the self-preservation instinct? It's that which keeps us alive by avoiding danger. How do we avoid danger? By seeing the danger, and the way that we see and experience danger is with fear. But that's how humans, and that's in fact how all animals, even down to the crocodile, that's how our behavior is managed, is through fear.
Yeah.
Humans have an option, though, and that is let's use wisdom instead of fear, because fear is really an automatic pilot. It's pretty dumb. It's pretty primitive, and we've got a higher way of doing things. All right, so actually getting out of the selfishness of our personality, out of the selfishness of our reptilian past, out of our old ways of doing and seeing things, which is basically based in feeling. Follow your heart, the whole, you've heard it all. This is a general discussion in society. And you could go so far then as to say those who are voting for head are voting for wisdom, they're voting for looking at things, they're voting for science, they're voting for altruism. And those who are working with the heart are working with selfishness, they're working with fear, they're working with hiding their head or becoming enraged in a mob, because a mob is kind of a false fearlessness. Every individual is fearful on his own, but in the mob, they'll take on Frankenstein's monster, which is a metaphor for the government, the guy who runs the place. Okay. But, and so everything like that is based upon fear. And so it's all based in selfishness. And so this is what the Buddha is talking about, is that basic frame of reference. But there's a little bit more to it in several respects. One of them is that we have to also look at the very, very deepest roots of these Pali words to try to understand how the English language translations kind of got screwed up.
Yeah.
At one time, I thought that it was the atom, which was a Greek word, that gave to atta in the Hindi or in the Indo-European language. But in fact, one of my friends who has got a Greek background as well as deep into Pali, he challenged me on this by looking up the word atom, and shows that it comes from the 4th century BC, which means it was not part of the common language that was shared. But there is a word which is almost the same thing, that this is where we gotten confused. The word is atmos, that we use as the word atmosphere. The air we breathe. Literally, we're talking about the life force, because even the ancients knew that when you stopped breathing, you died. So what was keeping you alive was breathing.
And it's interesting. Breathing is such a it's such a found or insight with the practice of anapanasati, sitting there observing your breathing. It's like this really obvious observation that like you are sustained by the constant movement of in and out. And that is actually, it's really obvious, but it very radically challenges the idea that we are a separate self. Because actually, if we need to be in constant communion with outside, then the barrier between in and out is
flimsy at best,
yeah,
and
non-existent.
Well, basically, even more than that, a magical belief, or worse, calling it a lie. This is part of our delusion. The delusion is that myself, who I am, is separate from everything else, and you just proved that ain't true. That's not true. We are, in fact, part of our environment. If you take a human out of his environment, he's going to change radically, even if you do nothing but take him out of the environment and put him in a cage, or take him out of the environment and put him in a place where he doesn't speak the language. But you can also do things like sensory deprivation and really start to mess with his mind. Unless he's already messed with it, and then he might, in fact, enjoy that sensory deprivation.
I was just going to say, I'd be really keen. I want to do a sensory deprivation thing.
They were quite common. I was in what they called a samadhi tank. That was what they were called then, and people would freak out in there.
I have a voucher for a flotation tank that I'll use in a few months' time when the place opens.
Oh, so they're still professional samadhi tanks, huh?
Yeah, they call them flotation tanks or sensory deprivation tanks. You go in, I've never done one, but my understanding is it's salt water, so you float in it. Yeah.
Yes, and guess what? With all that they do, they cannot, in fact, take out the sense of the body, the sense of gravity. They can make it dark, and they can make it quiet, and they can make it float, but they cannot take gravity away. They try to, but your head and all kinds of things with the little poodle, the pillow or whatever like that, I'm surprised they're coming back, because they were a raucous failure in the 70s. They didn't work. There was no samadhi in a samadhi tank. I guess maybe they could just call it maybe. Well, all you're going to get here, you're not going to get any samadhi. We don't call it that. We call it a sensory deprivation tank. And then the guy says, well, wait a minute, you didn't deprive me of my senses at all. I still want my money back. But anyway, and the thing is that we then don't quite understand that we're part of something that's much bigger. That in fact, this is why there are rules and regulations, but that the rules and regulations only prevent chaos. They don't actually bring satisfaction. That unsatisfactoriness is always going to be there, in the sense that there's always going to be people with wrong view that are looking for loopholes in the laws they find so that they can get away with it. That's a favorite pastime of humanity. So the second pastime is making laws, and the first pastime is breaking them and getting away with it.
That's it's interesting actually, where we started the conversation from when we recorded. It's sort of like the ethical or like societal application of selfishness versus not selfishness. Right? So someone could be in society a fairly altruistic person. They could have a big tent. They could be compassionate. And they could have all of these things, but there is still, I think, you're talking about getting to the roots, there is still a sense of self which is going to cause them to suffer.
Basically, you could say there's a bottom line down there someplace.
Yeah. I'm really interested in lowering the bottom line.
Exactly. Well, there are ways that we can do that. Sometimes we have friends to point out to us our conceit, because we can't see it ourselves. Yeah. But competing with another person, especially in the same profession, like you've got a particular teacher at the school that you don't like very much, that you'll find yourself competing with them. And so in that regard, the way to get through that is by going and making them your best friend. Because you can do that within a work environment. That I would recommend that people, if you're going to have to work around others, work around friends. Make each one of them a friend. You don't have to change him at all. He's good enough like he is.
It's one of the things I really like about teaching in the school I teach. I feel like it's a really I feel like there are certain professions or workplaces where you almost have to have a kind of aggressive ego in order to function or survive in that workplace. Obviously, it'll make you very unhappy in the process. In a school setting, and especially if my school is I really like my school. I like the people who work there. I find it very easy to not be competitive with the other people that work there. It is a very collegiate kind of environment.
That's really great. So
Yeah.
in that regard, now we can say that, well, but you have been in and possibly taught in, but around schools where there was a different atmosphere between the teachers who were competitive with one another in the
Yeah.
sense of universities of who gets what papers or who gets which students.
Yeah.
But in fact, I have seen academics compete with each other over whether I'm going to be one of their pet students or not.
Well, academia is people I know in academia. It's so full of ego, and it's so full of fear around the sense of self, and there because it's all about reputation, and it's all about how you present yourself, and people become very like mannered. Yeah.
All right. So you could see that, let us say, a young student graduating from, never mind that there are different kinds of schools, but that you had a new graduate who had the choice of either going to work in your school and therefore fitting into the milieu that was there versus her going and working in an academic setting and then having to fit in or thinking that she has to fit into the milieu there. In that regard, you could guess that she's probably going to have an easier, better life going to work with you guys, even if it's less money than if she works in that academic world that's so competitive.
And less status probably as well, like in wider society. Oh, you teach at universities, like that's considered very high status.
I get you exactly. It's all about protecting the personality.
Yeah, whereas
Now,
being a primary school teacher, you're like one up from being a babysitter in certain people's opinions.
right, head nanny.
Yeah, Danny, that's it. And also, interestingly, from a kind of gender perspective, like when I say I'm a teacher, people assume that I'm a secondary school teacher. So they assume that I do like a tough, manly job of like, looking after tough inner city teenagers. And then I'm like, no, I'm a primary school teacher. I teach like, 8, 9-year-olds. They, for some people still, there's like
I imagine that they'll treat you at the party the same way that the psychologists and psychiatrists say. You go to a party and everybody's mixing around, and the young lady comes up and asks, "Well, what do you do for a living?" And he says, "Well, I'm a psychotherapist." And she says, "Thank you very much. Bye." She turns around and walks away. I'm not going to stay here long enough for you to figure who I am out. So yeah, I can see that. All right. So now we can begin to see at a very practical level how selfishness versus altruism fits into all places and ways through our society that does influence the happiness of each individual, depending upon whether they're in a friendly environment or in a hostile environment. And the hostile environment is always a selfish, self-preservation, fearful place where everybody's in a state of protection at one level or another, as opposed into the cooperative, friendly environment, and that we can create this. This is our choice.
Yes. But then to keep pushing it, to keep pushing these layers, even in my friendly, cooperative, not particularly aggressively egoic primary school setting, when someone does feel attacked, because and I see it in my colleagues, I mostly stay out of it, but when people, I see, they suffer and they still can lash out a little bit, and you can see that they are protecting a kind of wounded sense of self, and you can see that they need other people to make them feel better. And the point is that, similar to what I was saying before, it's like, even within these kind of wider societal structures where we get to like have less and less aggressive ego, there is still this belief deep down that we are an independent, separate self.
Precisely.
And
It's dangerous.
Yes.
That independent self is in fact vulnerable.
Yes.
And needs protection. That's why the self-protection mechanism is there. You could go so far as to look back at very, very primitive life, where the cells themselves were actually conglomerating and hooking together to form a multicellular animal, doing that for protection. That's how deep self-protection is built into our genes, right down the earliest forms of life.
But yet that's also a good example of non-self as well. Like, that points to the kind of...
Exactly. So that which is felt within each cell of the self-preservation is actually why it's so primitive and it's so deeply embedded and built into it. It's literally in our genes. Selfishness is built into the genes and primarily works through fear, but this is also what gives rise to us grabbing weapons or tools. So the first axe, which was the first stick of wood wrapped to a stone,
Flint, yeah.
And everything associated with that very first axe, maybe 600,000 years ago, is now the cell phone. It serves the same purpose.
Yeah.
Protection. Some people I've even heard say, well, I've got my cell phone, which means I can dial 911, so I can go anywhere and get away with it. Because whatever's going to attack me is going to give me time to dial 911 and report that I'm about to get attacked. Really? But it's a false sense of security, which is what we're looking for. We don't like being fearful, and yet fear is the very thing that keeps humans and all other life forms alive. So it's almost a catch-22, and they say that same thing about breathing. That breathing ultimately damages and destroys the body. The breathing itself is what kills you, especially when you're breathing air in London. But yet we can't do without it. That which sustains us also eventually kills us. And that's the same way with the self-preservation instinct. While it keeps us alive at one level, it deadens and kills us at another. It keeps us from being wise. And so the whole thing then is, are we going to come out of the reptilian brain system into the frontal cortex? The answer is you can if you take a deep breath. And when are you going to do that? When you remember. Okay, and so this basic practice of waking the mind up, getting it fit for work, and coming out of our selfish, fearful, fear of loss, anger, and all of the negative feelings, so that we can now actually practice feeling really good. Because we spend our whole lives feeling bad. We're experts at feeling bad. That's the normal choice. Every time we get an opportunity to decide how we're going to feel, we'll choose to feel bad. It's really hard sometimes to accept good news. So if we decide then, no, I'm going to choose the way that I want to feel. I'm not going to choose the way that the personality does. That in fact, the personality is what we generally think of as me or self. The Buddha talks about that in regard of the five aggregates.
Mm.
But you can see the five aggregates as the personality or the foundation of what's going on. But then he points out that, well, you're not the body. You can't change the size of the body. You can't change the age of it. You really even can't control whether it's sick or not. But you are smart enough to figure out some places are dangerous and you keep the body out of those kind of places.
Well, also interesting, you're talking about the breathing. You can say the similar thing with eating. If you say, I am the body, but if you notice the fact that the body needs a constant interchange with the outside world through breathing and through eating and excreting, you realize that the body is not a fixed thing. It is a kind of like continuous changing process. And if something is because this is where Nietzsche kind of connects with it, isn't it? If something is in a
Yes, exactly.
state of flux, it does not contain an inherent selfhood.
There's not anything in there that's fixed.
Yeah.
There's nothing rigid. All right, let's go back to that quality of the word atmos, because atmos then allowed there to be a larger self. The atmosphere or our entire environment is literally alive, and that we're merely a minuscule part of that big, big self. Okay, and Buddha allows that. There's no problem with that. That's actually the language that Vedana would use. So we have to understand that the word self itself is used in various contexts. So this selfishness or this self-preservation instinct kind of self is only one kind of self, and the Buddha says, let's get out of that kind of self. But then getting into and involved with and through right view, right noble view, becoming part of the greater self, then that is who you are. Thou art that. This is exactly why the Zen will tell you flat out, you're already enlightened. You already are. You're already part of it. Just, look at what's going on. That's all you have to do is literally to wake up to the fact that you are not that tiny little thing that needs protection, but that you're actually a tiny little thing living in a marvelous environment, which is again a way of changing our attitude about it. So one is the attitude that has to do with something's wrong, something's fearful, something needs to be fixed, into the point of this is nice, no place to go, everything is good. And when we have that kind of mindset, everything kind of settles down. And this is what then we would refer to with these four skills we learn of right view, right sati, right effort, and right attitude. When these things come together, the mind becomes organized in a different kind of way, so that it's no longer trying to protect a little self. Now it's organized in a different way, and that this over and over again tends to get deeper and deeper and deeper, so that as the factors of awakening are developed, the what used to be right effort, that actually is some effort, takes effort to breathe. But later it becomes one way of saying it, we just get used to doing it. We get used to breathing well. We get used to remember to breathe well. Okay. And so getting used to it is the same way of looking at it as now it's energetic. It happens quite easily. But that depth then can be seen in another way. And that is, let us look at a hand action that is repetitive, but it takes skill to do it. But once the skill is learned, the hands could do it quite automatically without any attention, so that the individual can just have a conversation and talk all they want to. One example would be crochet or knitting. Another one perhaps would be cooking. Another one would be operating a sewing machine. Sometimes musicians get to that, so that you can have this guy in a piano bar and the girl comes up and chats to him and he starts hitting up on her while he hasn't even changed the tune that he's playing. He just continues right along. Or the one that I've seen recently, which does have an effect, and that is the same piano bar, and now the guy is playing an organ, and the police come in for a police interrogation, and he doesn't miss a beat. They're asking him questions like, where were you on this night, and what's your alibi, and all that kind of stuff. And here's his organ just playing right along and answering the police questions. Now that means that he's got something built really deep. It's gone really deep into his mind, that ability to play the organ. And so it happens on an automatic basis. So too are some of the skills that we're developing. And I can give you a list of them. One would be a startle effect. That when we're working with the body and developing the body, that kinesthetic awareness that we keep waking up then becomes kind of like an antenna, so that we can pick up things in a way now that we used to couldn't. So that in the old days, a robber could walk right up behind me and stick a gun in my back, and I wouldn't know it until he says, stick 'em up or whatever. But now, I'm not even going to be on the same block with this guy. I can feel that there's something in there that I don't want anything to do with. It's a sense that we build up.
It's like step 3 of Anapanasati, that kind of experiencing the whole body. When that becomes increasingly subtle and it becomes like more energetic than anatomical, say.
Yes.
And you feel like these, and how that relates to the kind of insight practice, like you feel these little contractions in that kind of subtle body, and as they relate to the kind of mental processes that are happening. Yes, I can see what you're saying.
Now, what I'm about to talk about is actually common in Thailand. Achan Po did this to me. It's also what they do in the Zen group with the Zen stick. Can you catch up with that kid and whack him without him knowing you're there? This really is a part of walking meditation, is learning to walk without making any noise at all. Watch very carefully where you're stepping and know what you're doing. And that it's in a childlike way, we can refer to it as sneaking up on someone. Now, in the cartoons, you know how they sneak up like this. When I'm doing that with Kitty, I'll actually go into those kind of postures because I want her to wake up. I do not want her to allow me into the room and to grab hold of her cell phone while she's watching the cell phone. I want her to know when I'm around. Okay, so this is basically a waking up. That I play with Kitty, but I learned that at Watch Two and Moke.
My children do that to me. We generally do it the opposite way around. We'll go to the park. I will sit in the park and I will pretend to lie down, and they will wander off together, and I'll see her whispering to him, going, let's sneak up on him. And they will try and they'll really plan it out. One will go that way, one will go that way. They'll like creep. And just when they're about to pounce on me, if I'm mean, I turn around and I go, I see ya. And if I'm being nice, I'll let them jump on me and pretend to be surprised.
That's really excellent. So you're already learning the lessons that I'm pointing at, but there's a deeper lesson in there. And that deeper lesson is for us to wake up to our environment.
Yeah.
And in fact, this happens in more times than when the kids are in the park with you. That I got used to it, but then I put a stop to it in the sense of waking up so that I would not allow Achan Po to come that close to me to whisper in my ear. And that's what his intention was also. He was, in fact, one of the words that he would use would be ta-ta-ta, which is basically be here now. And so this is actually part of the practice. And it's good that your kids are doing that with you. And they will continue to do that if you start doing it with them. Sneak up on them.
Mm.
Can you do it? Can you be quiet enough to sneak up on them?
They'll like this game. This is a good game.
And it all has to do with waking up.
To go back to what you were saying before, you're talking about how these skills get embedded and they get deeper and deeper and deeper, and you use this as an example of one of those skills.
Mm-hmm.
But you also used before that remembering to breathe well as another one of those skills. And then presumably that breath has associated with it all of the other things that we associate with it as a result of the practice of the full steps of anapanasati, i.e., not only do you remember to breathe, we remember to feel joy in that breath.
Exactly.
And all the rest of it. But going back, how this relates to the insight of non-self, and how this relates to insight in general, are you saying that also works in the same way? So we practice a kind of acting from a vantage point of non-self when we are not acting selfishly, when we are acting altruistically, etc., compassionately, from a place of love. That's kind of one example. But then perhaps how we relate to our feelings or how we relate to the aggregates, essentially. Like if we practice seeing thoughts as merely a part of that would be part of chitta chitta sankhara, right? Or we practice sensory,
or it might be verbal sankhara.
Yes,
if it's merely thoughts, because chitta sankhara is much deeper in the mind in the sense of feelings. At least that's the way it's presented in the sutras, and you can see it like that.
The group of the aggregates is just called sankharas, right? It's
right,
like,
and we can think of them as the sum total of the aggregates, or is in fact our personality, especially the component of the buildup of the stuff that happened over time being the sankhara. And then the method and the way that we process things in the sense of our perception. So our perception, our consciousness, and our memory base, our feelings, and our body are then the kind of sum total of who each person thinks they are.
Yes, and those.
Then when we start taking that stuff apart, we recognize, no, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, and I'm not that. Who the heck am I?
Yeah. See, the image that comes to my head is like, imagine a kind of 3-dimensional Venn diagram. So not just 2-dimensional on a flat piece of paper, but like interlocking rings. And each ring is like an aggregate or a part of the aggregate. And the space in the middle where they all overlap is why we have such a convincing sense of self, is because, and if we, and if we practice in meditation, because as I sort of outlined in that email, if we practice in meditation, letting things go as not self. So once there is some samadhi there and the mind is settled, we can watch a thought come up, or we can watch a feeling, or we can watch a physical sensation, or we can watch, or we can go subtler, right? And the aggregates help us do that, because we can actually start to slightly disengage perception from perception from Vedana, and consciousness from perception, and going into the memory banks from, and that's different from perception, and we can start to differentiate these processes, and as we do so, we can let go of them. And if we do that, but I suppose my question is, do those insights ripen then in the same way that sati does? So sati we get better at sati through repetition and through practice, through joyful practice, not through hard practice. And
that's not practice. They've already experts at doing it that way. That's their whole life.
Well, yeah. Does insight ripen it? So, for example, listening to, I listened to that. It's quite a famous recording of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talking about, about his passing, and he's talking about it like, I've forgotten the exact words, but it's like there is no Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. Like he was never here, and he can never die. What's the wordings of that?
That's good enough. That's close.
Yeah. And I was interested, as I mentioned
There's
to you.
nothing to die.
Yes.
That's actually the answer to those riddles that you see that Buddhism gets wrapped up in questions, in the sense of victory over death, which Bhikkhu Buddhadasa here is talking about in the sense, well, there's nothing really to die.
Yeah.
It's just a body, but there are millions of bodies, nothing special about a body or anything like that. Okay. That if there's anything left of it, it's the Dhamma, but that was already there anyway. But a lot of people have a fear not only of death itself, but oblivion, in the sense that they're completely forgotten or that nobody cares. It's like you've heard the phrase or the little poem, Smarty Marty had a party and nobody came but Smarty Marty. And that was his funeral.
I've not heard that before, no.
All right. Well, that's what we're afraid of.
Yeah.
We're afraid of becoming completely non-existent. And yet what's left of, for instance, there's been some very famous people throughout history, and we know quite a lot about them, and Socrates would be a good example. And yet we don't live with Socrates. We almost know almost nothing about him. And that all we're left with is mostly our own ideas of who he was, not who he actually was. That's gone. Everything is a Nietzsche. Things rot, die, break up, and are gone. And that's hard for each one of us to accept completely. Complete oblivion. And it's terrifying for a lot of people.
Yes. What's interesting as well, I wonder what you think about this, in a lot of Buddhist traditions, and this was another one of the other things I mentioned in the email, is that I think I've come to my own understanding of this since I put it in the email. I've been thinking about it. Do you remember I said that as I'm doing the non-self practice, there gets to a point where like I feel that there is a space that the aggregates arise in. And I have difficulty I had difficulty seeing that space as also impermanent and non-self. It felt like that space, like I wanted to give it some selfhood and some permanence. I wanted to call it like, empty awareness, let's say, something like that. But let me tell you the way I've come to think about that. I actually now think that what I'm doing there is I'm literally looking at the back of my eyes.
Okay.
And in the space, it's like my mind can't actually conceive of emptiness. It's like my mind can't conceive that there's nothing there. So in those gaps, when it really feels like there's nothing there still is that sensory consciousness of the eyes seeing, being conscious of the blackness of the closed eyes. And then I'm labeling that with a kind of status that it doesn't really deserve, because really that is sense consciousness, right? If we're talking about the aggregate. Exactly. And because that's the only thing that's coming in at that moment, when another thing comes in, when a thought comes in, when a memory comes in, when a feeling comes in, because it seems like that's the background to that thought, feeling, emotion, sensation, I'm investing it with this
kind of an unchanging, this is me as the observer.
Yeah, but it's actually something really like basic. It's just like, it is just the visual sense consciousness, which in those states of samadhi becomes very rich, right? Like it can become very rich. But there are certain traditions within Buddhism and more widely that that do reify that awareness, and they call it, you know, the ground of all being, or awake awareness, or they equate that universal big self with that awareness.
Okay, let us say that perhaps
Oh, I
what
can't
they're
hear you.
talking.
You've gone silent.
Oh, really?
Silent.
You can't hear me now. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No. Internet looks good.
Can't hear you. No.
Microphone. Skype says the microphone is working.
Can't hear you. Shall I call you back?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
You seem very far away. I think the problem is on your end.